Approximately a year and a half ago, discussions emerged on social media regarding the disappearance of a 3-year-old boy named Riker Webb. Conversations on TikTok, Instagram and YouTube centered around the case, noting that while incidents of children going missing in wooded areas are not uncommon, this particular case struck a chord because of its unusual circumstances. Some details remained unclear, and today we will review the story in detail. The small town of Troy in Lincoln County, Montana, became the focal point of these events. Riker Webb vanished from his own yard after his father briefly left him alone to attend to something inside the house. Upon returning, his father discovered that Riker was missing. This prompted a large-scale search operation involving local law enforcement, community volunteers, and professional search teams, all working quickly to ensure the child's safety. This incident also highlights a broader concern. In Russia, for instance, approximately 40 to 45 children are reported missing each year, leaving tens of thousands of families in distress. According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, over 43,000 reports concerning missing minors were filed in 2021, and thousands of children have yet to be located. These statistics reflect real challenges faced by families, underscoring the importance of community support and proactive safety measures. The case of Riker Webb serves as a clear example of this collaborative effort. On that day, in June 2022, in the small town of Troy, which has a population of no more than 1,000 people, Riker was last seen in the front yard of his family home alongside his father and their dog. Moments before his disappearance, Riker was engaged in his usual play, exploring the yard and searching for insects. His father had stepped inside briefly to retrieve some items, and upon returning, he found that Riker was no longer there. Following this, the local sheriff and numerous volunteers from the search and rescue team combed through the surrounding forest and nearby areas. Fortunately, a few days later, Riker was located, though the circumstances surrounding his discovery raised further questions. Troy is just one part of Lincoln County, a region known for its relatively low-lying terrain despite being in a state characterized by mountainous landscapes. The town is celebrated for its scenic views, featuring modest mountains, dense forests, and abundant wildlife such as black bears, white-tailed deer, antelope, elk, mountain lions, and other species. It is generally seen as a peaceful community where nature is enjoyed, provided one is not caught up in the distress of a missing child. On the day Riker disappeared, his activities were typical for a child his age. He played in the yard with his father and their dog, and he took time to explore the surroundings in search of insects, a common pastime among children growing up close to nature, often with a small container in hand for collecting bugs. As mentioned, Riker was seen running around the yard and turning over stones in the hope of finding an insect. At one point, Riker's father decided to go inside the house, and that is when the unexpected turn of events occurred. Surprisingly, the father later admitted that he could not clearly explain what he had been looking for when he went inside, nor why he chose to step away at that moment. While some details of the incident remain unclear, it is confirmed that he left Riker briefly in the company of their family dog. This decision has raised questions about whether it was safe to leave a young child unattended. Given that they lived in a small town with their home adjacent to a forest, the father may have assumed that nothing untoward could happen during such a short absence. However, upon re-entering the yard, he found that Riker was nowhere to be seen. Immediately he began searching the surrounding area and the edge of the nearby forest, calling out his son's name repeatedly. Despite his earnest efforts, there were no signs of Riker, no footprints, clothing, or any trace of his presence. In such situations, time is critical. For example, in Russia, parents are advised to report a missing child as soon as the absence is noticed, without waiting for a set period, since early action greatly increases the chance of a safe recovery. There is also no penalty for a premature report, and prompt measures can save a life. Shortly after, the boy's mother returned home, and the father informed her of what had occurred. Together, they contacted the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department approximately 2 hours after Riker had gone missing. This delay puzzled many, with some speculating that the parents may have hoped to avoid creating unnecessary panic. Nevertheless, once the authorities were alerted, a search operation was promptly initiated. A team composed of community volunteers and police officers scoured the vicinity of the family home. According to the father, Riker was dressed in either a blue jumpsuit or pajamas, had red hair and blue eyes, and was not wearing shoes. Initially, officials assumed that Riker would be found quickly. However, as the evening wore on, that assumption was challenged. Sheriff Darren Short of the Lincoln County Police Department issued a special alert and reached out to neighboring jurisdictions. He was confident that such a coordinated effort would be effective, particularly since it was unlikely that a 3-year-old would venture far from home. The search continued until severe weather conditions forced a temporary halt at the end of the first day, with efforts resuming the next morning. On the second day, the search team focused on a small area of forest outside the immediate vicinity of the family home, a zone known among local residents for frequent sightings of wildlife such as black bears and mountain lions, making it a less than ideal location for a small child to be alone. While combing through the forest, volunteers discovered a set of overturned stones. They speculated that Riker might have turned them over in his explorations, although this clue did not provide a clear direction for the search. By the end of the day, the overturned stones remained the only lead, as no further evidence such as clothing or footprints was found. Fortunately, on the morning of the third day, the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department received the long-awaited call that Riker had been located. He was found in an abandoned barn near a road known as Paris Road, over 3 kilometers from his family home. This discovery naturally led to questions from both law enforcement and the community about how a 3-year-old could survive for 2.5 days in Montana's wilderness, considering the challenges of limited food and water, fluctuating weather conditions, and potential wildlife encounters. Although definitive answers remain elusive, Sheriff Short personally visited the scene to verify Riker's identity and condition. On arrival, the sheriff found that Riker was in generally good health. Only a few bruises on his face and some minor scratches on his legs were evident. The child appeared understandably timid, likely due to being surrounded by many unfamiliar adults in uniform, though there was little doubt that the prolonged separation from his parents had been distressing. However, Sheriff Short suggested that the boy's unusual behavior might have been influenced by being surrounded by numerous uniformed officers, though he also noted that the 2-day separation from his parents was likely distressing. When Sheriff Short informed Riker that he would be taken to see his relatives, the child's demeanor improved slightly, and he appeared a bit more alert. Shortly afterward, Riker was placed in an ambulance, a moment captured in a now widely seen photograph. Observers remarked that his eyes appeared unusually wide, and his expression was not typical for a child his age. The owners of the abandoned barn, who discovered Riker after hearing noises from inside, were surprised to find a small, visibly frightened boy there. Soon after, Riker was taken to the hospital for a thorough evaluation, while police continued to collect evidence to determine the circumstances behind his disappearance. At that point, representatives from the Sheriff's Department openly attributed responsibility for the incident to Riker's parents, although no charges were filed against them. Later that day, Sheriff Darren Short gathered his colleagues to share his account of the events. According to him, at some point, Riker appeared to tire of exploring the front yard and wandered toward the forest. Curiously, the family dog did not follow him. Instead, Riker continued deeper into the forest, methodically turning over stones as he explored. It appears that after venturing further, Riker lost his bearings and moved in the opposite direction from his home. Ultimately, he arrived at the previously mentioned barn and climbed inside to seek shelter from adverse weather. This situation underscores the importance of teaching children safety rules from an early age, such as what to do if they become lost, whom to approach for help, and how to navigate familiar surroundings. For example, instructing children to memorize a parent's phone number and to identify trustworthy adults in times of need can be crucial in preventing further harm. According to Sheriff Short, despite his young age, Riker demonstrated resourcefulness by finding shelter and waiting out the storm, reportedly remaining in the barn for approximately a day and a half. However, questions remained regarding the likelihood of a 3-year-old child traversing more than 3 kilometers through the forest in search of safety. A major concern with this account is that Riker, like other children his age, would typically have significant needs for food and water. Notably, when he was found, he did not appear to be significantly dehydrated, a surprising observation given that most individuals can only go without water for a limited period. This observation led some online commentators to speculate that someone might have provided Riker with food or water. A few even suggested the possibility that Riker had been taken by another individual, someone who, they speculated, waited until his father went inside before abducting him and leaving him in the barn shortly before he was discovered. Moreover, some observers noted that the boy's emotional state raised concerns. Many believed that his demeanor did not seem typical for a child who had been alone for several days. This led to further speculation that if an abduction had occurred, the individual responsible might have taken steps to reassure him. Additionally, some commentators observed similarities between this case and another perplexing incident, the Casey Hathaway case from North Carolina. In that instance, a 3-year-old vanished while playing in the yard of his great-grandmother's house and was later found in a small clearing within a swamp. Reaching that spot reportedly required navigating waist-deep water, a challenge even for adults. When Casey was located, he was sitting quietly amidst overgrown grass and bushes calling for his mother. As with Riker, no significant injuries were evident, only a few minor cuts and bruises, which left many questions unanswered about how he managed to survive during his time alone. Ultimately, while the circumstances remain subject to ongoing investigation and public debate, the case serves as a stark reminder of the critical importance of early education on safety practices for children. Interestingly, Sheriff Short later mentioned that Riker claimed he spent some time in the company of a black bear. This unexpected remark has prompted mixed reactions, as both cases share striking similarities. In each instance, 2 young children disappeared and were later found in locations that would have been extremely difficult to reach without external assistance. Notably, both children were discovered with only minor injuries. In Casey Hathaway's case, he mentioned the presence of a black bear during his disappearance, a detail that some experts suggest might have been an imaginative interpretation of a stressful experience rather than a literal encounter with wildlife. Some online commentators took this remark even further, speculating that it was not a bear at all, but rather a yeti, a theory that, while circulating widely on the internet, remains highly speculative and is not supported by any concrete evidence. According to this idea, the animal might have exhibited a protective instinct by relocating Riker to a safer spot, away from potential dangers in the forest. However, it is important to emphasize that this is not a theory I subscribe to. It is simply one of the many interpretations that have emerged online. What is particularly remarkable is how Riker managed to travel approximately 5 kilometers from the location of his disappearance to the barn, where he was ultimately found. Despite having to navigate through a forested area with potential hazards, including limited access to food and water and the presence of wild animals, he sustained only a few bruises and scratches. This has led to ongoing debates about how a 3-year-old could traverse such a distance with relatively little physical harm. It remains uncertain whether we will ever fully understand all the details of these cases. Perhaps when Riker is older he might be able to share his recollection of the events, although it is also possible that his memory of the experience has been blurred by trauma. I invite you to consider these questions. Was Riker's case simply a matter of a fortunate disappearance where he was lucky to be found? Or is there a possibility that someone may have been involved in a more complex situation? The story of Riker UBA serves as a sobering reminder of how critical it is for communities to respond quickly and work together when a child goes missing. One key takeaway from this case is the potential role of modern technology in preventing or mitigating such incidents. Imagine if Riker had been wearing a children's smartwatch equipped with GPS, or if his parents had been using a reliable location-based application. In such a scenario, his parents might have received an immediate push notification as soon as he left the house, allowing them to react quickly and potentially prevent him from straying too far. Even if real-time tracking were interrupted, having a last recorded location would have provided valuable information about the direction in which he was moving. An early alert could have been shared with search services and local volunteers, significantly reducing the time needed to locate him and, ideally, preventing some of the stress and danger he experienced. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on this mysterious case. Does it seem more like a case of a child's fortunate survival after a confusing disappearance, or do you believe there might be more to the story?
Who could have foreseen that a devoted wife and loving stepmother would suddenly vanish, leaving her family in turmoil? On what should have been a triumphant day, Katrina Smith, thrilled about a promising job interview that could lead to a promotion, eagerly shared the news with her family. However, she never made it to the interview. When her colleagues noticed her absence, they reached out to her husband, concerned about their star employee's whereabouts. The real shock came when her husband revealed he had no idea where she was either. Panic spread, and the question on everyone's lips was, "Where is Katrina Smith?" Little did they know, the truth they were about to uncover would be far more shocking than anyone could have anticipated. Beginning, Katrina Smith was a vibrant 30-year-old woman, a devoted wife, and a loving stepmother to 3 girls, aged 21, 18, and 16. She had 2 siblings, Miranda and Chad, who described her as the funniest woman they had ever met, making their childhoods memorable and full of laughter. At home, Katrina often took her siblings on shopping trips or to random eateries to try new dishes, fostering a close-knit bond. Despite Chad not spending much time with the family, Katrina frequently visited him, forming a close friendship with his wife and offering him sage advice. Chad admired his younger sister's wisdom and kindness, seeing her as more than a family member, but as a true friend. Professionally, Katrina initially worked with her husband Todd in insurance before transitioning to the Human Resources Department at Cameron Company in Belvedere. Outside of work, she volunteered at Heartland Church, bringing her cheerful and bright spirit to the community. She also enjoyed geocaching, a community game involving GPS devices to find hidden treasures. Her infectious smile brightened any room she entered. Katrina lived in Machesney Park, Illinois, part of the larger Rockford community, located about 100 miles from Chicago.
Known for its blue-collar roots and industrial plants lining the river downtown, Rockford is also famous for the Rockford Peaches, though it has a reputation as one of the most violent cities in the U.S. Katrina and Todd met when she was in her 20s and he worked as a DJ. Despite a 15-year age difference, they fell in love. Todd's 3 daughters from a previous marriage didn't deter Katrina. They got engaged, married, and even ran a family business together, spending nearly every moment in each other's company. They had been married for about 7 years at the time of her disappearance and had recently celebrated their anniversary with a vacation. To everyone around them, the couple seemed deeply in love. However, unbeknownst to her family, Katrina was unhappy in her marriage and wanted to leave Todd. She had moved out of their home, staying with a friend in Roscoe for a while, and had even met with a divorce attorney. Secretly, Katrina had fallen for a man named Guy Gabriel and confided in him about her unhappy marriage, hoping to finalize her divorce from Todd and start a new life with Guy. Despite Guy being arrested for domestic battery, Katrina saw him as a genuine and honest man, everything Todd wasn't. Before officially leaving Todd and settling in with Guy Gabriel, Katrina wanted to secure a new job. On the night before her big job interview, October 22, 2012, she visited Todd's place to do her laundry and break the news that she had decided to file for a divorce. We don't really know how the conversation went with Todd, but it seemed as though he took the news fairly well, all things considered. Katrina left the house around 9 p.m. that evening, but after that she was never seen again. Her kids, husband, and boyfriend texted her multiple times, but all of their messages and calls remained unread and unanswered. No sooner than Katrina left the home that evening, she was gone. It was October 23, 2012. The day after Katrina had broken the news to her husband. Even though their marriage was now officially over, they opted to stay on good terms for their children's sake. However, this would quickly prove to be very difficult, as Katrina was now nowhere to be found. Interestingly, the night Katrina told Todd she wanted a divorce, he sent a message shortly after she left his house saying, "Sweet dreams, I love you." It was a rather odd message to send after just being served divorce papers. The following morning, he sent another message. "Good luck at your interview. You're going to be awesome." There was no reply to either of these messages. Given that Katrina never checked in with Todd to explain how the job interview went, and considering she never answered any of his calls, Todd grew increasingly worried. He decided to call Katrina's sister, Miranda, to inform her that he believed Katrina might be missing. Miranda hoped that her sister would turn up later that day, but this never happened. Later, Todd also phoned Paige, his oldest daughter from his first marriage, explaining that he hadn't seen her stepmom for quite some time and couldn't get a hold of her. Paige was puzzled and concerned. Like Miranda, she knew it was completely out of character for Katrina to leave without any explanation or note. After reaching out to all of their friends and loved ones and discovering that no one had seen or spoken to Katrina for nearly 24 hours, Todd finally contacted local authorities that evening to report his wife's disappearance. Earlier that day, Katrina's boss called Todd, concerned about why she didn't show up for work. Typically, Katrina would call in and give some notice if she wasn't going to be at work, but this time there was nothing. Guy was confused as well. He knew she had been at Todd's house the previous night, but hadn't seen her that day. Todd informed the police that his wife was scheduled for an interview that day, but never appeared. He confirmed that she had been with him the night before. They chatted briefly, and then she just vanished. Hours after Todd reported the incident, Katrina's photo was plastered all around Rockford. The news spread quickly, and everyone did their best to try to track her down. Intriguingly, weeks before her disappearance, Katrina had reported that someone was stalking her. A teenager had developed an unhealthy obsession with her, following her everywhere and desperately seeking her attention. Despite repeatedly turning him down, the teen persisted. Katrina's boss also recalled a bizarre incident in the parking lot. A man had thrown flyers out of his car window containing strange accusations about Katrina. Although the contents of these flyers were never confirmed, police began to wonder if this man might have been involved in her disappearance. Family, friends, and volunteers knocked on every door in the area, looking for evidence and asking both children and adults about any suspicious activity. Hundreds of people gathered for a candlelight vigil to pray for Katrina's return, but it ultimately felt like feeding a lion with breadcrumbs. Their efforts seemed futile. Meanwhile, Todd conducted numerous media interviews, appealing to the public for help in finding his wife. Initially hesitant to go on TV for fear of being judged, he was convinced that it might help, so he gave it a shot. It was clear to everyone who saw Todd's pleas for help that he was deeply struggling. His whole world had been turned upside down. As detectives began to dig into the case, the first person they spoke to was Todd Smith. While investigators questioned Todd, the search party was out looking for evidence. About 24 hours after Katrina's missing person report was filed, detectives discovered her blue Chevy Cruze abandoned on the side of the road in a residential neighborhood. A day later, her purse was found roughly 150 yards away from the car. The following day, her cell phone was discovered in a bush beside the road. While her family struggled to make sense of these findings, a search group uncovered blood-soaked paper towels in a field just south of where her car was parked. This was not the news anyone had hoped for. A couple of weeks passed, and the case took a shocking twist. An off-duty firefighter, while fishing in the Rock River near Byron, noticed something floating down the river like a log. It was dark, so he couldn't see what it was clearly. He took out his flashlight and shone it on the strange object. Although he couldn't determine exactly what it was, he had a gut feeling that something was very wrong. As the light hit the water, he saw clothing on what appeared to be a torso. His heart raced as he realized it was a body. He immediately contacted Winnebago County detectives, who arrived at the scene within minutes. As they pulled the body from the river, it became evident that it had been floating there for quite some time. Although the victim was clothed, her dress was faded and unidentifiable. She was in such bad shape that initially no one knew who this person was. However, after a forensic analysis, it was sadly determined to be Katrina Smith. Katrina had passed away from blunt force trauma to the head, or possibly drowning. It was never confirmed which of these ultimately claimed her life. She had suffered numerous bruises on her arms, body, and legs, indicating that she had been through a lot before she lost her life. The missing person case now turned into a heartbreaking homicide investigation. Detectives had a long list of suspects, including some family members, but they began by focusing on the last person she was with, her husband, Todd Smith. Katrina's phone became a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation. When the police retrieved it, they uncovered some shocking information. They found an unusually large number of text messages from Guy Gabriel on the night she disappeared. This sudden spike in communication raised their suspicions. However, Guy had an airtight alibi as he was at work that evening, making it unlikely he was involved. As the police delved further into Katrina's life, they discovered she was being followed, not by the obsessive teen previously mentioned, but by someone else. She had a second stalker. Nobody knew who it was, but the evidence suggested it might have been Todd. Police began to scrutinize him closely. Unknown to many, Todd had an interesting criminal history. In 1985, when he was 17, he confessed to disconnecting a gas line in the home he shared with his mother, stepfather, and 3 half-siblings. He stood outside as the home exploded into flames with his family still inside. Fortunately, they all escaped without major injuries. When police investigated the case, Todd openly confessed to arson, saying he had a fight with his mom and wanted to get back at her. His intent was to scare her, but he ended up destroying the home they had lived in for years. Todd was sentenced to 30 months probation and 160 hours of community service after pleading guilty to arson and waiving his right to a trial. Todd later married his first wife, Teresa, and they had 3 daughters together. He struggled to provide for his family, and Teresa became overwhelmed. She worked full-time, bearing the burden of supporting the young family. After their 3rd daughter was born, they were forced to sell their home to pay off debt. This was the last straw for Teresa. Working 2 jobs and caring for 3 daughters and a husband was too much for her to handle, something she never spoke to anyone about until Katrina's passing. One evening, just as she pulled into the driveway of her mother's home, someone snuck up on her as she was getting out of her car, punching her in the face without any warning. The attacker was wearing a werewolf Halloween mask. She quickly fell to the ground, enduring the punches and kicks of this masked man who refused to let up. She thought about what would happen if her mother came out of the house and found her lying lifeless in the front yard. This thought gave her a rush of adrenaline, enough to jump off the ground, push her attacker backward, and run for her life. A neighbor who heard her screaming phone filed a report that very night. When police spoke with Teresa later on and asked who the suspect could be, she said, "My husband Todd." Police took fingernail scrapings from Teresa and compared them to fibers on Todd's jacket, but the results were inconclusive. They wanted to test for DNA, but Todd refused. Since the police couldn't get a search warrant to obtain his DNA sample, they closed the case, and that was pretty much the end of it. After his divorce from his first wife, Todd met Katrina, and they eventually got married and moved to Rockford, Illinois. Todd gave investigators plenty of reasons to suspect him of being involved in Katrina's death. First, he grew agitated when he was separated from family and friends for questioning. He didn't like being considered a suspect and was so angry that he called Detective Vince Lindbergh to complain about the information the police had given Katrina's family. He questioned why the police told her family about the blood that was found in her vehicle's trunk. The problem was that the police hadn't found blood in Katrina's trunk. In fact, they had only just received her car and hadn't yet processed it for evidence. So how did Todd know there would be blood found in the trunk? Things only got worse from there. For instance, while interrogating him, Todd turned red-faced and buried his head in his hands, making noises that sounded like crying. But when officers looked closely, they saw no tears. When officers confronted Todd with evidence of his wife's affair, he pretended to be shocked. However, it was clear that Todd knew all along about his wife's infidelity and the identity of her lover. He had previously found a card in Katrina's car from Guy, describing her as the love of his life. Todd denied ever throwing vulgar flyers about his wife in the parking lot of her workplace. However, a surveillance camera in the parking lot showed a vehicle with no license plate, and police believed it had been borrowed from a local car dealership. The cops scoured every car lot in town to find a match. Eventually, they found the dealership, and the owner confirmed that Todd had visited his store several weeks earlier, looking for a car. The black Volkswagen in the corner of the lot caught his attention, and he test drove it around town.
He further added that anyone who test drives a vehicle must provide a photocopy of their driver's license. He helped investigators retrieve the license copies, and they found Todd Smith's photocopied license at the bottom of the stack. This confirmed that Todd took a car for a test drive on October 9, 2012, the same day the parking lot incident took place. On October 30, 2012, police obtained a warrant to search Todd's house. Without alerting anyone, they stormed in and retrieved his laptop and a baseball bat from the garage. This bat appeared to be covered in blood. Detectives immediately sent the bat to the crime lab for analysis, and about 3 weeks later, they found traces of Katrina's DNA on the bat. Todd was immediately arrested. On the night of October 22, 2012, Katrina left her Roscoe condominium and headed to her husband's house to do her laundry. But laundry wasn't the only reason she went there. She planned to tell Todd that she wanted a divorce. They had been living separate lives for quite some time, but they did their best to keep this quiet until a decision had been made. Well, Katrina had made that decision, and the divorce was filed for. When she broke the news to him, Todd tried to talk her out of the divorce, but she insisted she wanted to leave him. He even suggested that they adopt children, insisting they could fix this, but she was adamant about moving on. She couldn't continue pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. As the conversation was winding down, Katrina grabbed her things and planned on leaving. But as she neared the door, Todd grabbed a bat and unleashed on her. After she fell unconscious, Todd placed her in her car, drove it to the Ventura Boulevard area, and tossed her into the river. He then returned to the house on foot after abandoning her car and cleaned up the scene. When police got hold of his laptop, they saw he had a file on Katrina. This file included all of her location data for the past several weeks. It turned out Todd had placed a tracker on her car and was following her every move. At this point, everything was beginning to make sense. His computer showed that Katrina was last seen on the Latham Street Bridge, exactly where her body was found. It took many months before prosecutors put the case together and charged Todd Smith with the crime. Just before her disappearance, Katrina visited a U.S. cellular store in Belvedere 3 times in October. A sales rep from the store appeared at the trial and told the court that Katrina was scared about her husband accessing her text messages. She didn't want him to know who she spoke to and what they discussed. She showed up at the store that day to see about getting a new phone number and a private account that Todd couldn't access. By now, Katrina was convinced that her husband was using her phone to track her movements, but little did she know that the tracker was actually placed on her car. The sales rep advised Katrina to get a restraining order against her husband, especially after she noticed that Katrina's hands were shaking and she looked as though she might cry. Katrina never did get a restraining order.
Katrina's stepfather, Bruce Edlund, also took the stand. He told the jury that Todd had spoken to him about their failing marriage. He didn't believe him at first, but when Katrina stopped joining him for church on Sundays, he was convinced that something was wrong. A week before her passing, Katrina texted Bruce, asking how to obtain an Illinois firearm permit. She also inquired if she could practice at a gun range without such a permit. Edlund didn't take much meaning out of these questions and shrugged off the feeling that something might be wrong. Prosecutors invited Guy Gabriel to take the stand. He opened up to the public about his relationship with Katrina. It turned out that their relationship started in the office where they worked together. She worked in HR while he was a supervisor in another department. They spent the weekend before her passing together at her condominium in Roscoe. A few days later, in her final messages with Guy, she told him she planned to do laundry at Todd's house and watch Monday Night Football afterward. She also opened up about her plans to divorce Todd. He encouraged her to come clean and communicate with him, laying it all out so that they were on the same page. Her tone showed that she was scared of how Todd would react. In fact, she had been deliberately keeping that information from him for fear of what he might do to her. Despite all this evidence and the witness statements, Todd maintained his innocence. But the judge disagreed with Todd. He called Katrina Smith's loss evil and senseless. He said, "The fact is, Todd Smith, you killed her. You beat her on the head with a blunt instrument and put her in the river. Your actions after the crime I find unfathomable. You threw her in the river, a plastic bag going down the river to Oregon." Needless to say, Todd was found guilty and was sentenced to over 50 years behind bars. In the aftermath of the trial, Katrina's family was immensely grateful for the verdict. Her mother, Vicky, let go of a sigh of relief as she finally got justice for her beloved daughter. The trial had been emotionally exhausting for her family, but thankfully, Todd was exposed as the monster he truly is. Katrina was laid to rest at Arlington Memorial Park Cemetery on Mount Vernon Highway. In her memory, her family opened a foundation named Sissy's Footprints Foundation. This foundation is dedicated to helping people who have lost loved ones, especially under tragic circumstances, helping them learn to cope and giving them a shoulder to lean on when they need it most. The foundation's website, sissysfootprintsfoundation.com, has a forum where people can share their stories of loss and connect with others for support. In the end, Katrina's family did their best to make the most of an awful, terrible situation. The senseless violence against Katrina is just heartbreaking, and that's putting it very lightly. To think that one man can feel so entitled, yet be such a vile, nasty person, I just don't get it. In the end, Katrina had to pay the price for this man's senseless actions, and it just doesn't make sense. I just hope that, as time has passed by, Katrina's family has found some level of comfort in knowing that this man can never hurt anyone ever again. Thank you guys for tuning into another episode of True Crime Stories. If you enjoyed this video, then subscribe.
The billionaire Kosuke Nozaki was known for his extravagant lifestyle and insatiable appetite for women. At 77 years old, the Japanese businessman had reportedly been involved with over 4,000 women. His fascination with young, busty beauties led him into a relationship with 22-year-old Saki Sudo in 2017. Despite the significant age gap, Kosuke was overjoyed when Saki reciprocated his affections. Soon, he proposed marriage, never imagining that this union would ultimately lead to his demise. This tale unfolded in the small Japanese city of Tanabe, located in Wakayama Prefecture. With a population of around 70,000, Tanabe is primarily known for its fishing and agricultural industries. Kosuke was born on April 13, 1941, as the third of 7 children in a loving family. He was a mischievous child, often in trouble, and struggled academically. Eventually he dropped out of university to help his parents run their small wine shop. Kosuke's parents were not wealthy, and they gratefully accepted his help. Through his hard work, Kosuke managed to significantly increase the family's income. However, as his parents aged and eventually passed away, their modest inheritance was divided among the children. Kosuke immediately invested his share in his own business ventures. Kosuke became a moneylender, offering loans at exorbitant interest rates. At the time, there were no legal limits on interest rates, allowing Kosuke to make a fortune. He was known as a ruthless businessman, earning a reputation for exploiting people in desperate situations. This led to constant conflicts with his siblings, who disapproved of his methods. As his wealth grew, Kosuke expanded his business interests. He dabbled in scrap metal collection, sold condoms directly to customers, and eventually ventured into real estate and retail, opening a chain of liquor stores. Despite his success, his practices were often questionable, and he even faced criminal charges for tax evasion at one point. Kosuke's personal life was just as colorful as his business dealings. He was a notorious playboy, often paying for sex and indulging in numerous romantic escapades. According to rumors, Kosuke spent around 3 billion yen, approximately $20 million on women throughout his life. In a televised interview, he boasted about his love for tall, sensual women, and his willingness to lavish them with money in exchange for their company. Kosuke's extravagant lifestyle included organizing lavish parties, showering women with expensive gifts, and traveling the world in luxury. He owned multiple homes, drove luxury cars, and sailed on yachts. Despite his advancing age, Kosuke remained sexually active, and he was known for his vitality. In 2016, Kosuke published an autobiography titled Don Juan of Kishu, detailing his journey to becoming one of Japan's wealthiest and most notorious men. The book became a bestseller, further cementing his celebrity status. By 2017, Kosuke was so wealthy that he could afford anything he desired. However, his fortune also made him a target. He lived in a spacious house with his beloved dog Eva, often joking that she would inherit his entire fortune. Kosuke had been married twice before, but both marriages were short-lived and ended in divorce. In the fall of 2017, Kosuke's life took a dramatic turn when he met Saki Sudo, a 22-year-old woman 55 years his junior. They first crossed paths at Tokyo's airport, where Kosuke, captivated by her beauty, approached her. He invited her for coffee, and within a few months they were deeply involved in a romantic relationship. Kosuke was smitten with Saki, and saw her as the perfect partner to share his later years. Despite their age difference, he proposed marriage, eager to make her his wife. However, this decision would prove to be his undoing. Unbeknownst to Kosuke, Saki had her own motives for entering the relationship. She saw the elderly billionaire as her ticket to a life of luxury and financial security. While Kosuke was genuinely in love, Saki's intentions were far less pure. As their relationship progressed, Kosuke's health began to decline. In May 2018, just months after their marriage, Kosuke was found dead in his home under suspicious circumstances. Initially, his death was attributed to natural causes, but further investigation revealed that Kosuke had been poisoned. The shocking news of Kosuke's death sent ripples through Japan, and Saki quickly became the prime suspect. Authorities discovered that she had purchased large quantities of a deadly stimulant, which she had likely administered to Kosuke over time. Her motive appeared clear. With Kosuke dead, Saki stood to inherit his vast fortune. The investigation into Kosuke's death revealed a web of deceit and manipulation. Saki had meticulously planned her actions, playing the role of the devoted wife while secretly plotting to eliminate her husband. She was eventually arrested and charged with murder, bringing an end to a scandal that had captivated the nation. Kosuke Nozaki's life was a tale of excess, driven by his desires and ambitions. While he achieved immense wealth and notoriety, his relentless pursuit of pleasure ultimately led to his downfall. His tragic end serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind trust and the darker side of human nature. When the elderly Kosuke Nozaki married the young Saki Sudo, his relatives were bewildered and concerned. They believed the 77-year-old billionaire had lost his mind by marrying someone 55 years younger. Saki, born in 1996 in Sapporo, Hokkaido, came from a wealthy family but had a difficult time in school. She struggled academically and was often bullied. As she reached adolescence, her parents began buying her expensive clothes, bags, and jewelry, which helped her make friends and boosted her confidence. Saki soon realized the power of money and became obsessed with it. Determined to make something of herself, Saki attended makeup courses and attempted to break into the modeling industry. However, her efforts led only to a few appearances in adult films. Frustrated, she moved to Tokyo, believing the city would offer better opportunities. In the capital, she found work as a cosmetologist, but success continued to elude her. It was in Tokyo that she connected with a wealthy man who owned several bars. Saki was drawn to him because of his money, but when she met the elderly billionaire Kosuke Nozaki in the fall of 2017, she quickly shifted her attention to him, cutting ties with her previous lover. In February 2018, Kosuke and Saki were married. The elderly groom promised his young bride a life of luxury, assuring her she would be free from household chores, with a housekeeper to handle cooking, cleaning, and laundry. Kosuke even provided Saki with a monthly allowance of 1 million yen for personal expenses. The newlyweds appeared to be inseparable, spending their days dining at restaurants, driving around in a Mercedes, and strolling with Kosuke's beloved dog Ava. To an outsider, it seemed like Kosuke had found a way to enjoy the twilight of his life in comfort, with his beautiful young wife by his side. However, their happiness was short-lived. Just 3 months after their marriage, Kosuke was found unconscious in his bedroom and later died in the hospital. This tragic event was preceded by another shocking incident just 18 days earlier. On the morning of May 6, 2018, Kosuke was awakened by the distressing sounds of his dog, Ava. The animal was lying on the floor, twitching uncontrollably, clearly in severe pain. Kosuke, a devoted pet owner, hurriedly prepared to take Ava to the vet, but she died in his arms within minutes. Ava had been Kosuke's loyal companion for 10 years, and her sudden death left him devastated. The following day, Kosuke invited a monk to perform a farewell ceremony for Ava as he prepared for her funeral. Tragically, just 18 days later on May 24th, Kosuke himself would die under mysterious circumstances. He was found naked on the floor of his bedroom in an unnatural position. Although doctors did their best to save him, Kosuke never regained consciousness and passed away in the hospital. An autopsy revealed a lethal dose of methamphetamine in his system, leading to acute heart failure. This discovery was baffling, as Kosuke had always been outspoken in his autobiography about his opposition to drugs, claiming he never used psychoactive substances or stimulants. Furthermore, no injection marks were found on his body, suggesting that the drugs had been ingested or consumed in some other manner. Kosuke's death immediately aroused suspicion. Given his wealth and the suddenness of his demise, detectives began to investigate the possibility of foul play. They reviewed CCTV footage from Kosuke's home and discovered that the only people present at the time of his death were Saki and the housekeeper. On May 24th, Kosuke had spent the entire day at home. The housekeeper had been there most of the day as well, leaving only briefly around 4 p.m. to run errands. Kosuke spent the afternoon on the first floor with Saki before going upstairs around 6 p.m. to make some phone calls. When the housekeeper returned, she joined Saki downstairs to watch TV. At around 8 p.m. the women heard a dull thud from upstairs. The housekeeper asked Saki to check on Kosuke, but Saki shrugged off the request and continued watching TV. It wasn't until 10 p.m. after growing increasingly concerned that the housekeeper insisted Saki check on her husband. Together they went upstairs and discovered Kosuke lying unconscious on the floor. He was rushed to the hospital but died shortly after arriving. The circumstances surrounding Kosuke's death raised numerous questions. The presence of methamphetamine in his system, combined with his known aversion to drugs, led investigators to consider the possibility that he had been poisoned. Saki's behavior during the evening also seemed suspicious. Her reluctance to check on Kosuke when asked by the housekeeper suggested she might have known more than she let on. As the investigation continued, attention turned to Saki's motives. Some speculated that she married Kosuke for his money and orchestrated his death to inherit his fortune. Others believed that she might have been involved in a conspiracy with others who had a vested interest in Kosuke's demise. Regardless of the exact details, Kosuke's death was ultimately ruled a homicide, and Saki became the prime suspect. The case captivated the Japanese public, with many following the developments closely. Kosuke Nozaki's life had been one of excess, filled with wealth, women, and luxury. Yet, in the end, his relentless pursuit of pleasure and trust in a much younger woman led to his untimely and suspicious death. His story serves as a reminder of the dangers that can arise from blind trust and the darker motivations that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly perfect relationships. At the time of his death, Kosuke Nozaki was deeply involved in arranging the funeral of his beloved dog, Eva, and showed no signs of wanting to end his life. The only individuals who could have had any involvement in his death were either his housekeeper or his young wife, Saki Sudo. However, the housekeeper had been working for Kosuke for 10 years and had no apparent motive or benefit in killing her employer. As a result, suspicion quickly fell on 22-year-old Saki, whom Kosuke had married just 3 months earlier. In the event of Kosuke's death, Saki stood to inherit his considerable wealth, estimated at approximately 5 billion yen, or $35 million. Saki's behavior following Kosuke's death only fueled further suspicion. At his funeral, she showed little emotion, spending much of her time on her phone and even playing online games during the farewell ceremony. Her demeanor was detached, and she was seen laughing and joking, giving the impression that she was not grieving her husband's death, but rather relieved or even happy to have become a widow. As news of Kosuke's death spread, Saki became the target of widespread criticism. Many people believed that she had married the elderly billionaire solely for his money, and when he died suddenly, these suspicions seemed confirmed. Saki stopped speaking to the media and refused to comment on the allegations. There were even reports of her getting into a physical altercation with a journalist who tried to question her. Despite the accusations, there was not enough evidence at the time to charge Saki with her husband's murder. Investigators conducted a thorough examination of the case, even going so far as to exhume the body of Kosuke's dog, Eva, to test for toxic substances. However, by that point, several weeks had passed since the dog's death, and the tests yielded no conclusive results. Without concrete evidence, the investigation into Kosuke's death stalled, and for 3 years detectives were unable to find any significant leads or evidence to tie Saki to the crime. Then, in 2021, the police received a tip that Saki was preparing to leave Japan and move to Dubai. Detectives quickly realized that if Saki succeeded in leaving the country, they might never be able to bring her to justice. Acting swiftly, they arrested her in May of that year on suspicion of murder and placed her in custody. During interrogations, Saki claimed that she had not gone up to the second floor of the house between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. on the day of Kosuke's death. However, data from her mobile health app indicated otherwise, suggesting that she was indeed near Kosuke at the time he fell ill. Additionally, investigators uncovered damning evidence that a few weeks before Eva's death, Saki had searched the internet for information about banned substances and had sought contact details for someone who could sell them to her. Further forensic examination revealed traces of these substances on the kitchen floor and in the vacuum cleaner at Kosuke's home. Detectives also discovered that Saki had been in contact with a well-known drug dealer in Tanabe, and tracking technology confirmed that the two had been in the same location at the same time. A close friend of Kosuke's later revealed that the billionaire had confided in him shortly before his death, expressing a desire to divorce Saki. Kosuke had even asked the friend to be present when he broke the news to his wife, indicating that he was seriously considering ending the marriage. It also emerged that Kosuke had begun seeing another woman, which may have further strained his relationship with Saki. Just 2 months after Kosuke's death, Saki convened a shareholders meeting at Kosuke's company, appointing herself as president. She awarded herself an annual salary of $5 million and a bonus of $400,000. With this money, Saki planned to leave Japan and start a new life in Dubai. But her arrest halted those plans. As of today, the murder trial of Kosuke Nozaki is ongoing. Saki has spent the past 3 years in a correctional facility in Wakayama City. Despite the evidence against her, legal experts believe that it will be challenging for the authorities to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Saki was directly responsible for her husband's death. Proving that Kosuke was poisoned is particularly difficult, given the time that has passed and the lack of direct evidence linking Saki to the crime. Saki continues to insist on her innocence, maintaining that she sincerely loved her husband and had no intention of harming him. Currently, all of Kosuke's assets remain frozen, and it is unclear who will eventually inherit his multi-million-dollar fortune. Kosuke's brothers and sisters are hopeful that justice will prevail and that Saki will be punished to the full extent of the law if found guilty. This case has captivated the public's attention, with many eagerly following the latest developments. The story of Kosuke Nozaki, an elderly billionaire who married a much younger woman, only to die under mysterious circumstances, has sparked intense debate about the true nature of their relationship and the events leading up to his death. The trial's outcome remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: the death of Kosuke Nozaki has left a lasting impact, and the truth may yet come to light as the legal proceedings continue. The case of Kosuke Nozaki's death remains a gripping mystery, blending elements of wealth, love, suspicion, and tragedy. If you enjoyed this video and want to stay updated with more content, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Also, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you. Thanks for watching.